and Assalamualaikum. My name is Shafikha Binti Aziz. My metric number is 270583. So today, our group will discuss about German historical school, about the 5 magic questions and contribution of Friedrich List, Wilhelm Rostier and Gustav Skommeler in developing the ideas of the school. So first, we will go to the introduction. The German historical school began in 1840 with the publication of Friedrich List and Wilhelm Rostier. The German historical school ended on 1970 when their last scholar, Gustav Skommeler, died. The reason why they end on 1917 because Friedrich List and Wilhelm Rostier died early on 18th century. For instance, Friedrich List died on 1846, which means just 6 years after the school began. Meanwhile, Wilhelm Rostier, he died on 1894. By that time, after 77, which means after 77 years, most economy had observed some of the scholar ideas and theory, and the school no longer existed as a distinct entity. Other than that, German historical economy, they really despise and hate classical economists. Its historical background. Germany was divided into 39 independent states after the Napoleonic War in 1830 until 1832. The majority of the states are monarchical and undemocratic. Many Germans desire unification and constitutional reform, but their effort to achieve national unity were delayed for more than half a century. The German resistance to Napoleon sparked a feeling of patriotism and nationalism. At that time, the state that ruled the country is Prussia. This is because Prussia is the Germany's largest, wealthiest, militaristic and strong state. At that time, many foreign and native conservatives saw Prussia as a defensive wall against democracy and socialism. Furthermore, Bismarck's advanced social regulation reflected the monarchy paternalism and instilled devotion and patriotism among German workers. Bismarck claimed that the revolution in Germany were planned by the king. By disputing the historical relevance of British classical economy concept, German historical school defended and justified the German way of life, which is the laissez-faire. The British theory were clearly inapplicable to the situation in Germany, as in Germany, competition and business freedom were restricted. Other than that, mercantilist regulation still persisted in Germany at least until the formation of empire in 1871, long after they had disappeared from the British scene. For example, Friedrich List suggested a high tariff against import of manufacturing goods to protect newly emerging domestic industry, which is the infant industry. The reason why he suggested a high tariff because he wanted to reduce the import and also to increase their export as well as protect their new industry. Furthermore, at that time, the Germany that gave birth to German historical school was divided, weak and primarily agriculture. Because they were weak and divided, this situation led to the incorporation of the spirit of nationalism, patriotism, militarism and paternalism. And massive government intervention is needed to change the pattern and promote industrial growth. Other than that, because of the Germany of the middle of 19th century, they were far behind the England in terms of development of industry. The economists reasoned that government assistance was needed or required to catch up with England. Next is major tenet for German historical school. There are 4 major tenets for German historical school. Firstly, evolutionary approach to economic. Second, emphasize on the positive role of government. Third, inductive or historical approach. Lastly, advocacy of conservative reform. First major tenet is evolutionary approach to economy. They apply a dynamic evolutionary perspective in its study of society, concentrated on cumulative development and growth. An analogy sometimes drawn to Darwin's evolutionism in biology, which from the cycle we born, develop, grow, finally decay and then dies. Why they use evolutionary approach? Because society is constantly changing, and what is relevant economic doctrine for one country at particular time may be irrelevant for another country to use the same economic doctrine. This relativistic approach was eventually useful in attacking classical economies as being unsuitable for Germany. The second major tenet is emphasized on the positive role of government. German historical school was nationalistic, patriotic to their state, while classical economy was individualistic. The state of government foster industry, which means they promote industry, transportation, and economic growth. In the process of defending a unified economy, it was easy to develop an ardent nationalistic vision of the state. Historical school gave great prominence to the need of state intervention in economic affairs and stressed that the community has own interests of its own that are quite distinct from those of the individual. The third is inductive or historical approach. The need of researching the economy inductively or historically was emphasized or important. For example, from part to the whole, from particular to general, from fact to theories. Political economy can only be effectively handled in conjunction with other areas of social science because economic and other social phenomena are interrelated. This historical school stated that by employing a historical technique, it was able to investigate all the factors at work in the economic event as well as all the element economic behavior as rather than just the economic logic. The historical inductive method is now widely regarded as a useful complement to the abstract inductive method used by marginalists. The last major tenet is advocacy of conservative reform. The moral merit of this behavior and their effect must be weighed and compared in political economy, not just the motivation that drive the economic activities. It must establish a standard for proper web production and distribution in order to satisfy the need of justice and morality. The improvement of conditions for the common man should be entrusted to the Germany government. German Historical School advocated for moderate reform that prevented socialists from push for more radical democratism. Rather than fighting and winning their own struggle for betterment, a paternalistic state made concession to them. As a result, in Germany, patriotism and nationalism to the state become more popular.
Good day everyone, my name is Ong Zhi Yuan, metric number 269743. Now I would like to present about the third, fourth and fifth major questions. Okay, the third major question is, whom did the historical school benefit or seek to benefit? First, the members of the German historical school benefit themselves. They enjoy close and friendly relations with government officials and rose to dominant positions in economic life. In fact, the German government controlled most universities and schoolmother, known as the professor maker, control a majority of the economic appointments in Germany through his influence at the Prussian Ministry of Education. His students and followers were placed in economic posts, whereas the German adherents of the Austrian marginalist school were excluded from university positions. The historical school also benefited the German imperial government by defending its role in a nationalistic state. Okay, second is the historical economists serve the dominant business, financial, and land-owning groups by promoting moderate reforms that frustrate the drive for a more radical democratization of society. Instead of the poor and lowly fighting and winning their own battles for improvements, concessions were given to them by a paternalistic state. As a result, severity, nationalism, and loyalty to the regime were more widespread in Germany than anywhere else. Okay, the fourth major question is, how was the historical school very useful or correct in its time? Okay, first, the evolutionary approach to society and to economy thought provided a useful antidote to abstract thinking of the classical and marginalist schools. How else could one attempt to explain Great Britain's adherence to laissez-faire in the 19th century and its considerable departure from it in the 20th century? The historical school was correct in its perspective that economists needed to familiarize themselves with changing history and changing environments with economy and social evolution in order to understand the present world. Okay, for this task, inductive factual studies were required. New theories and new ideas had to be evoked to understand new situations, and these new theories and ideas require careful testing through the use of empirical data. Okay, now is which tenets of historical school became lasting contribution. The task of the German historical school was completed when economists of various persuasions agree that historical empirical studies are required to explain the present, to test old theories, and to develop new ones. Today, the historical inductive method has become generally accepted as complementary to abstract deductive approach. Changing times and methodological controversy have forced the two into an unity but tolerably placid marriage. Okay, for example, contemporary econometric analysis normally incorporates both abstract theories and empirical testing. The data for most of the empirical testing are historical as opposed to being derived directly from experiments. Today, however, economists generally search for the most recent historical data available to test their theories, as opposed to scrutinizing data gleaned from the distant past. If society is constantly changing and if new situations call for new analysis, then the past experiments have only limited relevance. So, John Maynard Keynes, who is the father of John Maynard Keynes, pointed out this fact as early as 1890. You all can refer to the ebook page 225 to see the full paragraph. Okay, next is another lasting contribution of the school was its attack on laissez-faire. This term was the trend of the future. The members of the historical school recognized that unrestricted free enterprise does not necessarily produce the best possible result for society as a whole. And they were right in their belief that reform can be a substitute for vast upheavals brought on by sharpening class distinction. A final word, the German nationalism advocated by the historical economists overreached itself as it evolved into a frenzy militarism. During the century ending in 1914, the hope was rising that the world could achieve peace, international cooperation, and universal harmony. The German historical economists struck a strident note of nationalism that judged this internationalism nationalist sentiments of goodwill. Their ideas, perhaps internationally contributed to the climate or in Germany that led to World Wars I and World Wars II. In this respect, some of the ideas presented by the historical economists were detrimental to society's progress. That's all for me. Thank you.
We are going to talk about these three people here who have contributions in developing the idea of German historical school, which is Friedrich List, Wilhelm Roscher, and Gustav Smoller. Friedrich List, which full name is George Friedrich List, born on 6 August 1789 and passed away on 13 November 1846. List, by the year 1816, he became a clerk in the civil service, had risen to the post of ministerial under-secretary. In the year 1819, he accepted a professorship in administrations and politics at the University of Tübingen. He then became active in promoting a strong political and commercial union of the German states. He also presented a petition for a customs union to the Federal Assembly on behalf of associations of merchants and manufacturers that he had organized. In the year 1820, he elected to his state legislature. List advocated other administrative and financial reforms that were considered very radical in his day. He had served 8 months in the prisons, after which he has deported. During the year 1825 to 1832, he lives in United States and became a farmer, a journalist, a business promoter, making and losing fortunes of coal mining. In the year 1833, he became an ardent advocate of the railway network for Germany after returning to Germany. His effort to create a German customs union were realized in the establishment of Zollverein in 1834. At the last, 1846, he committed suicide because of ill health, financial difficulties, and disappeared over the delay in German unification's darkness in his later days. In his protections for infant industry, List advocated free trade within Germany while championing a high tariff against import of manufacturing goods to protect newly emerging domestic industries. However, List opposed protections for agriculture because development of large-scale industry through protections would enlarge the home market for agriculture. List severely condemned Adam Smith and classical economics for claiming universality for doctrines that were appropriate for England but inappropriate for underdeveloped countries. List denied Adam Smith's notions of harmony of interest. List argued that statements had two responsibilities, one to contemporary society and one to future generations. Normally, most of leaders' attention is occupied by urgent matters, leaving little time to consider future problems. But when a country had reached a turning point in its development, its leaders were morally obligated to deal with issues that would affect the next generations. These fundamental doctrines was that a nation's true wealth is the full and many-sided development of its productive power rather than its current exchange value. For example, its economic education should be more important than immediate productions of value. And it might be right that one generation should sacrifice its gain and enjoyment to secure the strength and skill of the future. Under moral conditions, an economically mature nation should also develop agriculture, manufactures, and commerces. This contends that Smith's economic system is not an industrial system but a merchandise system that he called the exchange value system. Production power can be increased by military preparations, war, and war debts in certain cases. War expanded its productive power so much that increased value it received annually, that is, increased output productions far exceeds the annual interest on its enlarged war debt. Spending money on supplying its armies meant shipping goods to the theater of war and ruin foreign manufacturers and ensure England's industrial supremacy.
I am Lim Jeng Cherng and my metric number is 271933. So I will explain the next contributor of German historical school with Wilhelm Roscher. Wilhelm Roscher, born in 1817 until 1894. Wilhelm Roscher history and background. So, Wilhelm Roscher is a professor of political economy at Göttingen and Leipzig. All of his 5-volume textbooks, which is economic science, which took 40 years to complete, within 1854 until 1894, and it was widely used in Germany. Wilhelm Roscher's first volume reached 13 editions by 1878, and when it was translated into English as Principles of Political Economy. Wilhelm Roscher is one of the founders of the Older Historical School, which is OHS. Older Historical School wanted to supplement classical theory, whereas the Younger Historical School, YHS, led by Gustav Smaller, wished to supersede it entirely with historical studies and policy consideration. Although Roscher repudiated the classical economics he had learned in his youth, he still built upon those ideas. This was the basis for the Younger Historical School condemnation of Older Historical School. So, the next part, we will discuss about historical method. Roscher tried to establish the law of economic development by using historical method from the investigation of histories, legal, political, and other aspects. He contended that the object of political economy is not to establish the best possible state of things, but to describe the actual state at which the economy has arrived through continual development. Societies are continually evolving from immature to mature forms, which may be considered the most perfect. The mature societies, however, eventually decline and decline. This is due to evolution theory. Wilhelm Roscher added that the knowledge gained through the use of historical method does away with feeling of self-sufficiency, and the higher civilization will not talk down with contempt on lower ones. So we move to the next part, which is historical basis of deductive method. Wilhelm Roscher showed his affinity for economic theory by including a simplified version of English classical price theory in his Principles of Political Economy. Instead of disdaining abstract theory, Wilhelm Roscher sought to discover its historical basis. Wilhelm Roscher accepted that the study of contemporary facts and opinions is essential adjunct to the classical deductive method. So that's all from me, and I will pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
My name is Shin Yee 27706. So I will continue for Gustav Westmoreland's part. Gustav Westmoreland was born in 24 June 1838, and he placed of birth as Hamburg, Germany, and he died in 27 June 1917 at the age of 79 at Bad Homburg, Germany. He was a leading figure of Younger History School, and he was a professor of Political Science at Handelsbergen and Berlin. He founded and major leader of very first sociopolitics, as also named as Association of Social Policy. This organization advocated social legislation and helped to promote the idea of greater government activity in social and economic affairs. He wanted to deliver economy exclusively on basic historical monograph. He anticipated to deductive methods as he is one of the scholars that contribute inductive approach in economy. Next, the method and street. It is a famous conversation between smallest and calm region. Method and street is what is the battle of methods between inductive method and deductive method. So, deductive method. This is an analytical and abstract approach by pioneer David Ricardo. Ricardo began with the basic premise and then used the logic to deduce generalization. His destiny is to use assumption to bolster his arguments. The method of partial equilibrium analysis championed by many members and mathematicians who was useful for extracting from the complexity of the real world in order to understand it. So, this approach allowing one variable change while other variable temporarily constant. It also enables to investigator to accept complex phenomena one step at a time. Besides that, inductive method. It emphasizes the importance of studying the economy inductively and historically. For example, from part to whole, from particular to general, from facts to theory. Because economics and other social phenomena are interdependent. Political economy cannot be treated adequately except in combination with other branches of social science. Inductive study use primary sources, material, and study change in social institutions. JHS claimed that its historical method allowed it to study all the forces of economic phenomena or the facts of economic behavior, not merely their economic logic. In addition, the method and street method was began. The battle began when Menger has published a book on methodology that defends theoretical analysis, which are deductive method, and rated smallest inductive method as merely secondary in importance. According to Menger, the historians have stepped upon the territory of our science like forest colloquial in order to force upon their language and their customer, their terminology and their methods, and to fight the intolerability every branch of inquiry which does not correspond with their special method. Smothers reviewed the book unfavorably in his Johannesburg, and Menger replied in angry pamphlets titled Errors of Historicism. When Smothers received a copy of Menger pamphlets for review in his Johannesburg, he printed an announcement that he was unable to review it because he had written it immediately to the author. He had also printed an insulting letter to Menger and included with the pamphlet. In the end, economists believe that both of inductive and deductive methods are important and they normally supplement each other. For example, contemporary econometrics analysis normally incorporate both abstract theorizing and empirical testing. The data of most the empirical testing are historical as opposed to being derived directly from experiments. Furthermore, social reforms. Scholars believe that ethical value judgments should be encouraged. Justice in economic system could be achieved through paternalistic policy of social reform by the state and all social groups. The guiding principle of social reform is more equitable distribution of income. He excluded other historical schools of attempting to apply the lesson of historical too quickly. However, despite of the innumerable massive historical studies that he and his students published in order to establish an empirical basis for national economy theory, they failed to produce an economy theories. Their major contribution lay in the area of economy history. Lastly, protectionism. Smollett was an advocate of free trade during his younger age, and he changed his views on protectionism. In 1901, he favored a protective tariff for Germany, and he also held Alexander Hamilton's and franchise list as his teacher. He justifies that tariff on the basis of least influence industry arguments and goes further of it. He feels that tariff as international weapons and that might benefit a country if it's being used skillfully. In conclusion, the German historical school arose in 1840s with the publication of franchise list and Wilhelm Roscher and ended in 1917 when Gustav Smollett died. GHS in general were critical of classical economy. They criticized the abstract, dictative, static, unrealistic, and historical quality of classical and marginalist methodology. GHS also suggested the use of evolutionary and deductive method in economics analysis and emphasized government interventions in economy through conservative reform. GHS economy tried to improve the situation of ordinary people by improving their health status, living standards, and efficiency as a factory worker. As a result, the combination of nationalism, patriotism, militarism, patriotism, devotion to duty and hard work, and massive government interventions not only promote the industrial growth in Germany, but also strengthen the loyalty of workers and ordinary people to state and prevent them from supporting the extreme socialist ideology. That's all from us. Thank you.